Kia ora everyone. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for the very generous introduction. And thank you to the New Zealand Gardens Trust for having me. It's a privilege to be here and to share some thoughts and ideas. So thank you very much. I have a landscape architecture practice called Neville Design Studio. I've had my business for about 5.5 years. And I work from a space in Grey Lynn here in Auckland. The focus of my work is largely residential design of different shapes and sizes, and sometimes I take on commercial projects. What I'm most interested in is being a mechanism for a cultural shift in the way we live with our environment. This is a project which I completed with the New Zealand Heart Foundation a year or two ago. It's one that transformed a car park into an entrance garden and cafe space for the New Zealand Heart Foundation and Ripe Deli. This is in Ellerslie in Auckland. This is another photograph from that same project. But before we dive into that, I thought it's worth exploring the idea of a changing cultural aesthetic, given that's the title of the talk. And I thought this might be a good place to start. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And to me, this describes a cultural aesthetic perfectly. If this is true and we don't see the world as it is, but as we are, then who am I and how do I see the world? And what's the lens that I see the world through? My journey starts here, which is a fairly typical family photo maybe. That's me being held by my mum. What's unusual about this family photo is that it's the only family photo, the only full family photo that I have. My dad died 2 weeks after this photo was taken. He was 31 and he took his own life. He was a fun-loving sort of a guy. He was an engineer and he specialised in water and soil. Not surprisingly, he loved gardening. That's my dad and my older sister. That's in Albany, where they were living at the time. I still have that wheelbarrow that my dad's holding in that photo. My mum and dad loved hiking, and they spent their honeymoon hiking Great Barrier Island, which was talked about on our trip to Matakana, and if you haven't been, I'd highly recommend it. This photo from somewhere in the South Island, I think. So I grew up with my mum and my two sisters in Browns Bay on the North Shore of Auckland, and my mum loved gardening as well. We had a veggie patch. It was a pretty basic sort of a patch, and I remember sometimes the only thing we got out of it was silver beet, and it seemed to always be silver beet for dinner, amongst other things, of course. And getting pretty over silver beet at one stage there, but anyway, I think most of the time we ate it. And we often went for bushwalks as kids, and I think we weren't particularly excited to go for bushwalks most of the time, but then when we got into the bush and in nature, we always enjoyed it. And this is where my connection with plants and with our environment sort of started, really. We also did family holidays to Hahei in the Coromandel. And again, this was another part of my upbringing, and I loved the time by the beach and spending time with nature, and we did this with a couple of family friends. Sometimes we'd have the summer cyclones roll in and everyone would clear out. We'd dig a trench around the tent and just bunker down and see it through, which was always actually really exciting. And one of my favourite memories, just sort of hunkering down to see these storms through. So if we fast forward a few years, this is a photo of my mum. Probably 2 years before she died. That was in 2017, and she died of cancer. I thought I'd give that start a little bit of breathing room with this image. This is a photograph that I took in Milford Sound. It's near the entrance of Milford Sound, near where Milford Sound meets the Tasman Sea, and I did a overnight trip there with my best friend Scotty. And this is a moment where I feel closest to my parents and closest to myself and closest to nature. This looks smaller on my laptop. And it's obviously an uncomfortably close-up selfie of me and Scotty paddling out into Milford Sound. On that overnight mission, we paddled along and we had this seal next to us for probably 10 minutes. And for 8 of those minutes, we just sat and watched the seal. It was rolling around in the sun, keeling over onto its side, sort of just really enjoying life and very relaxed. And then after some time, we took out our phones. My friend Scotty's a photographer, so he took out a much bigger camera. But anyway, this photo is actually off my phone. And for those that have been there, Milford Sound, New Zealand generally, but that place particularly, I think, is almost biblical. And the scale of it is quite hard to comprehend. For reference, the white dots sort of in the background there on the right are planes, not birds. Humans are nature. It seems that somewhere along the way we've lost sight of this truth, and Damon Gamo has a great TED talk which is titled "The Story That Shapes Your Relationship with Nature." I'd highly recommend it. And he talks about this ever-evolving story that we've told ourselves, and how if the science makes sense but the story doesn't match, then it's hard to build momentum. So this TED talk and that narrative, I think, is quite powerful. So if humans are nature and we're talking about a cultural aesthetic, then to me this image summarizes it quite well. I took this photo on a trip to Nepal in 2013, and it's of course the rice terraces, and I think that when humans and nature have a close relationship with one another, then so much beauty falls out of that, and this image is a great example. After some time in Nepal, I did a 3-week hike in the east of Nepal, travelled to India, and travelled from east to west across the north of India. And this sort of image is really common. Cows are sacred, and it's very common to see cows sitting on the road and people giving them huge amounts of respect, moving around them. And to me, this illustrates a cultural aesthetic beautifully also, and the way in which how we are as people and our values absolutely affects the world that we live in. Our cultural aesthetic with cows is a little different, and if we see cows on the road in New Zealand, it's more likely to be in this format. So we're not here to talk about cows, but those two images placed next to each other, I think, provide or illustrate really clearly just how much culture, seen and unseen and sort of intertwined into us, affects the world that we live in. And many of you will recognize this image, which is Versailles, just outside of Paris, and it's a garden which falls out of the Baroque movement. It's all about control. It's all about wilderness being something over there, and everything closer to us, closer to the architecture, very much control, and illustrates that to me just perfectly well. The scale of Versailles is completely hard to comprehend unless you've actually been there. That image, it does it some justice, but it is just enormous. And beautiful in its own way, I accept that, but it does represent absolute control over nature. So this image is, this garden, is by Luciano Galbelli, and he's a designer who I really look up to. However, to me, this is a great example of how that absolute control over nature translates into the more residential realm. Likely a lawn which is fertilised however much, mowed however often, and low diversity, low ecology, not huge amounts of life, and absolute control. Here's a second image, also by Luciano Galbelli. The first one was from the year 2000, a garden of his, and this one from 2024. So to me it seems like he's been through his own journey with a changing cultural aesthetic, and maybe the things that move him as a person have shifted. This is high diversity, full of life for us and for all other living organisms. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge this woman. This is Catherine Gustafson, and she was in New Zealand last year courtesy of the Garden Design Society. I was fortunate enough to have a chat with her and hear her lecture and her masterclass and everything that she brought to the table. She has a practice based in London and France and is currently designing 1.5 kilometres which stretches underneath the Eiffel Tower in Paris. So she knows a thing or two about design, and as part of her talk, she introduced me and others to the idea of a changing cultural aesthetic. So here we are. Let your garden grow wild. What's important to me about these two images, which are from another TED Talk by Rebecca McMacken, is that if we're thinking about life not only for ourselves but for all life, then it's not necessarily about formality or more organic looking gardens. And the top image there, while maybe beautiful in some ways, is an ecological desert. It's low diversity, it's huge amounts of lawn, and I would say quite an old school way of thinking about beauty and gardens. The second image is an example where the garden meets the architecture. It's high diversity and full of life. A quote that I really like out of this TED Talk goes like this: "You might not like bugs, but they're still keeping you alive. 1 in every 3 pieces of food that you eat is a direct result of insect pollination." That's a small snippet of this talk. If you're interested, I absolutely recommend it. Oh, I will add that Rebecca is an ecological horticulturalist, which is a thing, and she was the director of horticulture at the Brooklyn Bridge Park, which transformed an area in downtown, Brooklyn, Manhattan, New York, from just a desolate, industrial-looking port to an ecologically rich space, which I've visited and is incredible. So a little bit more about me. I studied landscape architecture at Unitec and at Vic. I started my journey at Unitec, and at the time, Jacqueline Margetts was the head of landscape architecture. And in an early lecture that she gave, I remember her saying, "This course will change the way you see the world." And I remember sitting there thinking, whatever, Jacqueline, what do you know? But anyway, turns out she was right. This is a photo from my final crit at Victoria University in Wellington. For some reason, I decided to cut my own hair before this crit, and it sort of ended up in this funny-looking mullet sort of situation. And my final year project was titled Shift to Nature, and that was about resilience on the south coast of Wellington and leaning into natural systems and how they can make our coastlines and communities more resilient. After my studies in landscape architecture, and during actually, I did gardening and landscaping, and I moved to Australia for 3 years. I worked in bars, I sold coconuts at one stage, and this is a photo from landscaping in northern Queensland. That's me in the middle of that image there. Yeah. My friend on the left thought it would be funny to throw a snake around here and there just because landscaping in Australia wasn't scary enough, so that was fun. So many of you will recognise this woman. This is, of course, Xanthi White. After my time in Australia, I worked for Natural Habitats for a few years, and after that I worked for Xanthi, and I think that the way Xanthi sees the world and the sensitivity in the way that she designs left a huge impression on me. And I remember early on working for Xanthi and working on a residential landscape design project, and I wanted to extend a wall by maybe a metre or so. And Xanthi said no. And I sort of thought, oh, why not? We'll extend this wall, it's only a metre. And she just introduced me to this softer way of thinking about design, and instead of extending this wall, this concrete block wall, that sort of spatial design challenge was resolved with some really clever planting designs. I learned a huge amount from working with Xanthi and with her team. And while I was working for Xanthi, she also introduced me to another woman called Georgina Reid. We sat down with Georgina for lunch one day with Xanthi and the team. You do fun stuff like that when you work with Xanthi. And Georgina Reid is a writer, a gardener, horticulturalist who lives just outside of Sydney, and she has a book, and she also has a journal called Wonderground. Some of you might be familiar with it, but if you're not, Wonderground is all about the intersection of people, plants, place, the world, the environment, and to me is very much on the front edge of the sort of thinking which is valuable to us at the moment. The human being has become nature's warden and nature's executor. This is a quote which fell out of the NZILA Landscape Conference in 2022, and to me is really powerful. It struck me and I wrote it down, and like you do with these sorts of things, you go away and then you think about it for a little while, and what does that mean? So to me it starts here. This is a photo that I took on the Papatūānuku track in the west coast of the South Island near Punakaiki. This is destination nature. This is over there. And in New Zealand, not so much in the current political environment, but generally, we've done a really good job with our land with DOC and looking after nature. It's over there and everyone agrees, let's look after her. And this is the nature's executor aspect of that quote. I've chosen this image because it was from Google and I'm not sure where it is, but overseas somewhere. I don't want to offend anyone. But this could be anywhere in the world. It could be in Auckland or another city in New Zealand, and it's ecologically dead. I mean, possibly the smallest amount of something could live here. It's almost inhabitable to us, I would argue, and huge amounts of concrete. So who really cares anyway? I mean, if we have concrete splayed out everywhere, who really cares? Well, there's another element to this. Craig Pocock is a fellow of the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects, and he spoke at the Landscape Conference that same year. And this little piece of news scared me a lot. Carbon from 1 tonne of concrete takes 20 trees 80 years to offset. I was shocked by that fact. Craig Pocock has done a lot of work in and around concrete, which he calls the carbon landscape. So at this stage you're thinking, oh well, 1 tonne of concrete, that's probably quite a lot of concrete, so maybe it's not so bad. This is my dog Pete. He's here to help illustrate what 1 tonne of concrete looks like. So it's about 0.4 cubes, which works out to be about a 2 by 2 metre square at 100 mil thick. And that's what Pete's sitting in there. So that square of concrete at 100 mil thick, which is probably your standard pathway or something like that, takes 20 trees 80 years to offset. That's a little bit doom and gloom, so we'll move on. But it's important to acknowledge our flaws and to acknowledge these things, these sort of habitual norms that we've done in the past. A landscape studio which I look up to often, they're called Terramoto, and they're in the States. And they have a very different approach. There's a lot of text there to deconstruct and dive into, but in summary, they call this different approach radical gardens of love and interconnectedness, which to me is just awesome. This is a project which they did called Platform Park. It's completely permeable. There may be some concrete involved with footings and things, but you'll see that the seat is cut out of an old tree, a salvage tree. The plants are all local to the area, and it's full of life, not just for people, but for all inhabitants. And David Godshall, who's one of the directors of Terremoto, he rightly points out who uses our gardens, who are the biggest users. And while we obsess about ourselves, and that's okay to an extent, the biggest users of our gardens are birds and insects and bugs. We sit in our gardens on the evening after work, maybe on the weekend with some friends. The birds, the bees, the bugs, they're there 24/7 if we let them. Another image from that same project by Terremoto. So this is one of my projects. This is in Omaha, just north of Auckland. And this is a before photo, of course. And I met with, it could be an after photo, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder after all. I met with Roger, and he drove me up there. We shared a car together and got chatting, which is always helpful because a little bit of time together, you can start establishing some trust. And the brief for this project was a deck. And you can see in the bottom left of that image that he has a deck. And it happens to be actually quite a large one, but anyway. And so we talked more about why he goes to Omaha, why he escapes Auckland, and what's the reason for getting up there. Then he started talking about the beach. He started talking about disconnecting from suburbia, toes in the sand, and all of those kind of beautiful, nostalgic things which we think about when we go to the coast. So managed to sort of talk him into another possibility. This project started as a landscape consult, and that just involves a sort of workshop together on site. And this is where it started with this quite rough sketch. And what I suggested was plant everything, and just a very simple intervention in the land, which provided an opportunity for seating, maybe a fire pit, and enjoying the evening sort of as it rolled in. He was on board with that, and that concept evolved a little bit further and turned into a landscape design. And this is the concept plan. So you'll see the deck, that's the existing one, and that's a ginormous couch to actually try and take up the size of the existing one. So this is a less is more approach. It's about one single intervention in the land, which is a curved paradise stone wall that sits into the natural contour of the site, and then steppers which link through planting. Another concept sketch. This is Eric from North Harbour Stonemasons, and he's starting the work for the curved paradise stone wall, which was really the key intervention. And this is a photo of that garden a year or so after completion. Roger was pretty happy that he didn't get a deck in the end. So this image talks to that simple intervention in the land, which is the curved paradise stone wall, which is from a quarry near Whangarei, so it's fairly local to Omaha. We talked about how we finished this fire pit area and different sort of materials and things. We didn't entertain concrete, but we talked a little bit about decking and that sort of thing, and in the end landed on sand. It was already there, and if we linked back to that early conversation, he talked about enjoying getting out of Auckland and having his feet in the sand, so it made huge sense to finish this in the sand that was already there. The grasses are a mixture of Poaceta, Kinochlora flavicans, Kinochlora bromoides. There's Euphorbia glauca, sort of as an emergent plant, and Hibiscus richardsonii, to name a few of the plants that kind of come into the mix for this garden. The garden faces west, so it's a great opportunity to sort of slow down and enjoy some slowness as the evening rolls in. This is the second project that I'll talk to, and this is at West Harbour School in Auckland. This project started with a workshop with the students, and we walked around together and talked about what's important to them at school and in life, what their dream garden might look like. And they came back with this myriad of beautiful sketches and ideas. So each design sort of evolves a little bit differently, and I think sometimes it's with lots of sketching and sometimes it's with words, and I think allowing ourselves the freedom to design in different ways for different projects is quite important. So this one was more words, and the challenge was, how do I take this workshop and what's important to the kids or the students and then translate that into some sort of meaningful spatial design composition. A few of the things that fell out of what was important to them was, interestingly, the school logo, and the principal shared with me that one of the old students came back to school with the logo tattooed to their leg. So the huge mana at this school, massively diverse, I think 23 or 24 different ethnicities represented, Decile 2 school. Interestingly, flowers was a common theme amongst what the students presented as well. So the school mission statement talks about standing tall, proud, and confident, and that became part of the narrative too. So a rather messy kind of sketchy drawing on the right is trying to rationalize and distill these ideas down into some sort of spatial design composition and weave the stories that they have shared sort of into the land. So that landed here. The narrative for this design starts with 26 Cody trees which walk from the front entrance to the school office, one tree for each of the classrooms at the school. The trees also symbolize the school mission statement to stand tall, proud, and confident. And then along this pathway, which is representative of the local Manatawhau stream, are three curved benches, a blue, a black, and a gold, and they represent the school logo. There's trees, native trees, which connect with the students' team names, and the gardens which sit adjacent to each of the benches talk back to the meaning of those arches of the logo. This is the planting plan. It's rather chaotic. This is the final planting plan. This is what I presented to the principal in this format. The principal was amazing, which is, her name's Vicky Hitchcock, and this project is she's hugely responsible for this project being able to happen and guiding the politics on her side and making it come to life. Another before photo. During construction, and I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in glossy images, and we all like a glossy image, don't get me wrong, but part of what we do as designers is undo what's already there, and how we undo it is really important, and I'm trying to continually learn and undo less, but it's messy. You go backwards for a little while, and this is it under construction. And the same or similar angle 2 or 3 years after it was finished. Had I heard Craig Pocock's talk about the carbon landscape, the benches would be in timber, not concrete. So continually trying to learn and do better. So one of the things which is important for me about this garden is it's largely native, although this area is about diversity and diversity from overseas, which connects with the students from overseas. Is when we plant larger areas of the Earth's surface, we don't need rain gardens, we just simply need gardens. And I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but singing to the choir, sorry. But when those proportions are more in balance, the rain simply hits the Earth's surface and then permeates into the ground. So a big portion of this is, I would say, in some ways quite simple, which is just plant more and plant with diversity. The concrete steppers are recycled from the deconstruction of the existing landscape. Another thing that's important to me about this garden is it's not one that you walk past or sit next to, it's one that you walk through and that you're in. And they've since had art class out here doing their thing. This is sort of at the front of the school and an entrance garden. However, it's hugely popular with the kids at lunchtime. And revisiting this place and connecting with the staff and with the students and just seeing it used is a real pleasure. So you'll see some of the Kodi trees dotted down. And I spoke with Vicky about, when I presented the design, I spoke with Vicky, the principal, and she said, "Richard, do we need 26 Kodi trees? It seems like a lot." And I said, "Well, Vicky, early on you told me you're not in Ponsonby. You're not a Ponsonby school. This is West Harbour." and sort of illustrated the mana of the place and the spirit of the place. And she said, "Okay, yeah, you're right. We'll do 26." So this shot looks up to the gold bench, and behind the gold bench are the last 4 Kodi trees, which are symbolic of Te Whare Tapawha, which is the 4 cornerstones of Māori well-being. And there you see the gold bench again and the Kodi trees sitting in behind. So I thought this might be a good place to have a little pause, and we can probably all recognise this, which is a kōwhai flower. What we don't know is if this flower is in a residential garden, a commercial garden, or in the public realm. And what's important to me about that is that the tui don't know that either. So it's crucially important what we do in all realms. This is a project in Browns Bay, and not too far from where I grew up. It also the first project that I took on while having my own practice. So this one's close to my heart. It was a site of almost all lawn, a family who love plants, love gardens, so it's a great place to start, and ended up being almost all planted. Diversity, largely native, although there's some perennials and edibles sort of interwoven in the mix too. Here's a before photo of one area of the garden, which is just a slippery sort of grassy clay slope. Things under construction. This is a paradise stone wall again, and as much as possible, I try not to use stone from overseas. I think that it happens sometimes, and you have a client who's looking for something special out of Italy or that kind of thing. If possible, I try not to take on those sorts of projects, but I do land them sometimes. But anyway, to me it doesn't make huge sense lugging stone across the world. So I often use paradise stone, which is fairly local to Auckland, which is, as I said earlier, from a quarry in Whangarei. The project being on the plant layout day, and I think as a landscape architect and as a garden designer, this is probably one of our biggest privileges, is being able to paint with plants, being able to design with time. We're designing in 3 dimensions, but we're also designing in another dimension, which is time, and trying to wrap our heads around how this might be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Another rather chaotic planting plan, and I try to take the original to site because I find it easier to read, and often we try to always plant in the cooler season and when we have more consistent rain, which means that often these planting plans, even though they should probably be laminated, end up in this sort of colourful, beautiful mix. And for me, even though it makes it really hard to read on site, is sort of an illustration in some ways of what the garden might do over time. This is the same plan, which is the result of a couple of days on site in the rain. And this particular garden was planted between lockdowns in Auckland in 2020. We had all of the plants ready to go from the nurseries as Jacinda Ardern announced we were going into lockdown. So we asked the nurseries to kindly unload the plants and hang on to them for however long. It was really special to be able to get out there and stand in the rain and lay out plants for this project at a time which was pretty uncertain for all of us. This is sort of just on the planting day, of course. and this image from 2 or so years after it was planted. Here's our slippery, grassy clay bank, and the paradise stone wall, which you can see just poking out from the side of the cabbage tree there. This is Ada, one of the daughters of the family, and Ada and her brother Marcus love tearing around this garden, exploring, seeing the garden shift and change and watching new flowers come out and all of that sort of thing. And this is Marcus and Ada standing at the entrance to what we call the secret garden. And this spot was almost all lawn 2 or so years before this photo was taken as well. So at this stage we've done full circle. We're back at the Heart Foundation in Ellerslie in Auckland. And this is a project from a year or two ago. Around the time I took on this project, which was early 2023, this happened. Which, if you're from Auckland, you'll recognise this image acutely well. And I think it's something that we'll never forget. And of course, the Hawke's Bay they had a hard time too. I was going to say learned a few lessons, but possibly not. We'll see. So this was a brutal reminder of the result of huge amounts of concrete, huge amounts of asphalt, and a disconnection of the natural rhythms of nature. And we really got rinsed that day. So presented with this project at a time where Auckland went underwater, I saw that as an opportunity to maybe push things a little bit and see where we could land. The site is in Ellerslie, and it's marked by the red rectangle there. What I find most interesting about this image is, in terms of cultural aesthetics, is the aesthetic which falls out of our culturally entrenched car culture, and the amount of space which we allocate and give to cars. And interestingly, Ellerslie train station is just off to the right-hand side of that image. So it's an unusual scenario in Auckland, but some of these people, if they're fortunate to live near a train station at each end, could catch the train to work, or maybe even bike. This is the site. It was 5 car parks, almost all asphalt, not overly inspiring, and the brief from the Heart Foundation was fairly short, really. They didn't say huge amounts, which was kind of tough. I took a bit of time kind of trying to tease out some information from them, and at that stage I was thinking, they might have thought, far out, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, he keeps just asking questions. But anyway, those questions were important to try and establish, are these guys looking for a nice pot in the corner or something a little bit more than that? And it turned out a little bit more, which was great. Another before image from a different angle. So this leads me to a quote from Jane Goodall. If you want somebody to change their mind, it's no good arguing. You've got to reach the heart. Something they don't tell you at university is if you design something, it doesn't mean it's going to get built. You can design something beautifully, it can make sense spatially, but that doesn't mean it's going to get built. So I presented a design package with some nice drawings and things, and then also put together a narrative which I'll share with you. Here we are, perched on the precipice of a climate crisis, floods and cyclones. How can we engage with meaningful change that embodies wellness for ourselves and our planet? The Heart Foundation Urban Orchard does just that. The narrative for the Urban Orchard starts at the meeting place of the New Zealand Heart Foundation and Ripe Deli. Platforms for healthy hearts, healthy food, and healthy lives. What better way to celebrate these two entities than a space that celebrates life itself? Urban Orchard is a space that operates at the intersection of people and nature. an edible garden that illustrates a healthy relationship with each other, with food, and with Papatūānuku. It provides life and food for people, bees, birds, and all living organisms. A retreat from the concrete sprawl and endless impermeable surfaces. A place for the Heart Foundation to celebrate friends and whānau, peace of mind, community, possibility, life, and love. So they went for it. So that was the result. Again, I think acknowledging the work that goes into these things, and landscaping is tough work. And as well as that, even trying to reduce concrete as much as possible, the glass house, which was part of this design, landed on a 400 by 400 concrete footing, which is an enormous amount of concrete. But that was the pre-engineered spec, and that's what was put in. So it's another little challenge that we have along the way. We had an olive tree donated by Blackbridge Nursery, which was very kind of them, and that was sort of like dangerously thrown over the top of the glass house, which was a great photo, but a nervous moment. And the garden on completion. So this garden is 100% permeable. It's gravel and timber. The water from the glass house goes down pipes and then into horizontal pipes, which have holes halfway up for the water to fall out into the garden. And titled Urban Orchard, we of course included a number of fruit trees. Something which was really important in the brief for this garden was one of the many questions I asked, which is how does it feel to be in here? Is it public? Is it private? Is it somewhere in between? Are you walking onto the land which is owned by, which you are, but in terms of atmosphere, owned by the Heart Foundation, or does this feel very much belonging to the public? And they said, somewhere in between. So that was interesting. But anyway, where it lands is this sort of like permeable, filtered view from the street where you can see in and see what's happening in. You can also be in the space and look out. But it lands in a place which is, or intends to be, inviting to the public, but also feel part of the Heart Foundation. One of the conversations we had when I presented this, actually when they had a chance to review the design, was can we have some bike racks? And embarrassingly, I didn't have them designed in initially. But fortunately, this really beautiful piece of poetry came out of that, which is they had 5 car parks to start with, which occupied the whole space. They now have 5 bike racks, which sit discreetly off to the left-hand side of this image. And for me, it is such an enormous illustration of the huge potential and possibility we have in these spaces which are occupied by cars. Some of the space. They have 42 car parks in total. They now have 37. So it's a small shift for them, but it's hopefully a big gain for the community and for the environment in this area, which is so heavily paved. The plant palette is largely native, some edibles, herbs, and the odd perennial, sort of providing some life through the warmer months and colour through the warmer months as well. This gives you an idea of that filtered view from the street. So you're looking from the street across planting to a ramped boardwalk, through to the glass house, through to the cafe inside. So something which I try to do for projects as much as possible when they're finished is to stop and have a beer or maybe lunch or maybe afternoon tea and acknowledge the work that has gone in and just stop a little bit ourselves, the landscaper, the client, and whoever was involved. So we did this for this project. Ripe Deli put on lunch and we sat down and had a drink together. I think that so much of gardens is as much about our connection with plants and with nature as it is with ourselves and with others. And this is a great opportunity to reconnect with each other as well. This is a photo which was taken after lunch, and it was a nice moment to just stop and enjoy the change and enjoy the transformation and the journey that we've been on together. So I thought this might be a nice place to finish. This is a quote from Jennifer Jewell. She has a podcast called Cultivating Place in the States. Never lose sight of the leadership and paradigm shifting capacity of just one garden. Kia ora.